Got fined $200 for repainting my porch on Veterans Day. Name's Walter Ellison, 78 years old, retired mechanic, Navy vet. The cedar stain hadn't even dried yet when that letter came, still smelled like old varnish and cold coffee. Held it in the same hand I used to sign my HOA's first charter with a fountain pen older than half the board. What do you do when the rules you wrote come back to punish you? Walter Ellison had spent 3 weekends sanding and staining his porch. Cedar brown, it was the same color his late wife picked 30 years ago. Each slow stroke of the brush was deliberate, meditative. The morning sun filtered through bare branches as Walter sat on the porch's wooden steps, mug of black coffee in hand. Autumn had settled comfortably over Willow Creek, Missouri. Amber and rust-colored leaves rustled across his neatly trimmed lawn, clinging to corners and flower beds. From the small AM radio perched on the porch rail, a familiar crackle gave way to a Sinatra tune, the same one he and Marion used to dance to on Saturday nights. Walter gently touched the worn armrest and muttered, "She always said this porch was the heart of the house." It wasn't just paint. It was memory, Marion's favorite shade chosen during a trip to Branson in '93. Cedar brown. He could still hear her voice, faint but sure, over the clink of iced tea glasses and the creak of the swing. A rustle at the mailbox broke his reverie. Mailman Joe, with his ever-present ball cap and red thermos, waved from the sidewalk. "Morning, Mr. Ellison. Got something certified here for you." Walter shuffled to the gate, signed his name, and opened the thick envelope with a paper knife carved by his grandson in Cub Scouts. Inside, a fine, $200. Violation of HOA Regulation 7A. Exterior paint non-compliance. His brow furrowed. He read it again, then again. Cedar brown had been on the approved list last year, he was sure of it. He'd double-checked before he started sanding. Later that afternoon, as he was sweeping stray sawdust from the porch, a silver Lexus pulled smoothly into his driveway. Janice Tolliver stepped out in crisp slacks and a tailored blouse, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Ellison," she greeted with a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. He returned her nod. "Ms. Tolliver, I noticed the new stain. Lovely craftsmanship, truly. But unfortunately it no longer complies with the updated HOA palette." He gestured to the porch. "This color's been part of this house longer than the HOA's been around. We all must maintain standards, Mr. Ellison," she said, cool and firm. "It's about preserving harmony and consistency within the community." Walter didn't argue. He just looked past her to the edge of the porch where a small engraving still read 1978 Ellison House. When she left, Rita Cole appeared at the fence cardigan tucked around her shoulders, holding a Tupperware of peach cobbler. "Don't take it personal," she said gently. "They changed the color list last quarter, buried it in a newsletter nobody reads." Walter accepted the cobbler with a quiet thanks and sat with her on the porch swing. The wood creaked in familiar rhythm as the sun dipped lower, casting warm orange streaks across the porch boards. That evening, he moved slowly down to the basement. Past shelves lined with holiday lights and tools to an old filing cabinet he hadn't opened in years. He pulled out a yellowing folder marked HOA Original Charter. Inside, nestled between pages, was a worn copy of the HOA bylaws from 1991, bearing the signature of Bill Harper, the original founder, and a printed color chart, with cedar brown circled in ink. He stared at it, fingers tracing the edge. Upstairs, the rumble of tires on gravel startled him. He rose, joints stiff, and stepped outside just in time to see a black sedan ease to a stop. The driver's door swung open. A young woman stepped out, duffel bag over one shoulder, curls wind-tossed and eyes lit with tired warmth. "Hey, Grandpa, mind if I stay a while?" Emily Ellison hadn't been back to Willow Creek in 8 years, but the porch still smelled like cedar and pumpkin pie. The air was cooler than she remembered, brisk and dry, with that earthy scent of fallen leaves clinging to the cuffs of her jeans. As she stepped onto the porch, she set down her duffel and reached to tighten a loose screw on the railing, half out of habit, half from instinct. Walter stood just inside the doorway, watching quietly. "You still fix things the second you see 'em," he said, a soft smile breaking across his weathered face. Emily turned. Some things don't change. Inside the living room was just as she remembered it, wood-paneled walls, the old recliner by the fireplace, and framed photos that hadn't moved in decades. The only new addition was a crocheted afghan draped over the couch, probably Rita's handiwork. Walter poured cider into 2 ceramic mugs. Grandma always had cider ready by November. You missed that. Emily took a sip, letting the warmth spread through her fingers and chest. "I miss a lot of things," she said quietly, glancing at the photograph of her grandmother beside the radio. Later that afternoon, she walked into Debbie's Cafe, a cozy spot on Main Street with gingham curtains and checkered floors. Debbie was behind the counter wrestling with a stack of menus and muttering under her breath. "Emily Ellison," Debbie exclaimed, "as I live and breathe." "What's it been, 8 years?" just about, Emily said with a grin. "Still making those pecan sticky buns? Gave up last year, too much sugar, not enough help. But we've got decent coffee and cornbread soup today." They chatted while Debbie fixed her a bowl. Above the register hung a hand-painted sign, "Veteran Discount. 15% off." The frame was slightly crooked. "I like the new sign," Emily said. Debbie rolled her eyes. "HOA made me take down the old one last month. Said the font wasn't neighborhood consistent. Had to hire someone to repaint it." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Since when does the HOA care about font?" "Since Janice got elected president," Debbie said dryly. "And she's got her eye on everything." On her way home, Emily noticed a new bulletin board near the mailbox cluster. It was sleek uniform and posted with laminated notices, one of which listed the latest HOA-approved colors. Cedar brown was nowhere to be found. She frowned, pulling her coat tighter. Something didn't sit right. Back at the house, she found Walter folding laundry in the den. "Grandpa, do you have the latest HOA guidelines?" Walter waved a hand toward the old filing cabinet. "Not sure I've got the latest, but there's the original set from '91. Kept it when Bill Harper handed everything off." Emily pulled out the folder, flipped through the pages, and found the familiar layout of regulations and signatures. It was simple, clear, and surprisingly democratic. She glanced at Walter. "This porch color thing might be bigger than paint." He looked up. "You think they're pulling something I don't know yet?" she said, scanning the text again. "But this charter is nothing like what I just saw out by the mailboxes." Dinner was a quiet affair. They sat at the small wooden table beneath the window, steam rising from bowls of beef stew, cornbread on the side. Emily buttered hers slowly, eyes still distant. Walter noticed. "You've got that look your grandma used to get when she knew something wasn't right." "I just don't like bullies," Emily said. That evening, she laid both documents out on the dining table, the original HOA charter from 1991 and the newly printed one she'd photographed from the bulletin board. Her eyes narrowed as she highlighted discrepancies, missing clauses, newly added language, and subtle changes that tipped power toward the HOA board away from homeowners. Clause 14.2 used to require a community vote for any changes to exterior property rules, she murmured. Now it's board only. That's not a typo. Walter looked over her shoulder. That changed when... "Looks like the last 5 years," she said. "No public meetings, no record of homeowner approvals." She turned to him, sharp and serious. "Grandpa, do you still have access to the clubhouse records?" The clubhouse smelled like lemon polish and arrogance. Emily stood just inside the door, taking in the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the faint scent of old paper. The meeting hall, once the site of summer potlucks and neighborhood cook-offs, now resembled an overgrown office. Laminated flyers lined the corkboard wall, monthly meeting schedules, updated trash collection codes, and a poster reminding residents to report any property violations immediately. She ran a hand along the edge of the long oak conference table, its polish still sticky in places. Walter's voice echoed in her mind. They used to hold barbecues in this hall. Now it's just votes and fines. A soft shuffle broke the stillness. Ronald Trent, the HOA treasurer, emerged from a side office, a manila folder clutched to his chest. He looked startled to see her, but quickly composed himself. "Miss Ellison, isn't it your grandfather's granddaughter?" "That's right," Emily said, her tone pleasant but pointed. "I'm here to exercise my right as a resident representative. I'd like to review the HOA's financial records." Ronald hesitated, blinking behind thin-framed glasses. "We typically require written requests." The bylaws, section 7.4. Emily interrupted, state that any resident may examine the association's budgetary and financial reports with due notice. "I'm here now. That's notice." His jaw tightened, but after a beat he nodded and motioned her toward the back room. "You'll understand that some materials are confidential. I can show you the approved ledgers and public records." "Of course," she said, following him through a narrow hallway lined with dusty trophies from neighborhood lawn contests. The storage room was colder lit by a single yellowing bulb. A large metal file cabinet stood beside a dated desktop computer, its monitor humming faintly. Ronald produced a key and opened the top drawer. "These are last year's statements," he said. "The digital versions are on that machine, but it's temperamental." Emily slipped on a pair of gloves from her coat pocket and began leafing through the folders. At first glance, everything looked ordinary. Garden maintenance, clubhouse utilities, snow removal contracts. Then she spotted a line item, tennis court resurfacing, $38, $400. She frowned. "You have a tennis court?" Ronald glanced up. "No. Well, we planned one years ago, but it never passed the final vote." Emily flipped through the accompanying receipts. The check was made out to WM Group, LLC. She opened her phone and tapped quickly. The company's registration was public and unmistakable. The listed address matched the business location of David Tolliver Janis's ex-husband. Her pulse quickened. "Mind if I take some notes?" she asked, already scribbling on a pad. Ronald hesitated. "No flash drives or copies. Just written notes." "Understood." While Ronald pretended to organize nearby shelves, Emily discreetly angled her phone beneath the table and took silent photos page by page. A few receipts bore a red stamp, "Do not circulate." These she noted especially. Near the bottom of the drawer was an unmarked folder. Inside was a single document typed dated 2 years ago. A memo outlining changes to financial oversight. The signature line bore Janice Tolliver's name alone. She tucked it back quietly. Emily turned to the computer, nudging the trackball until the screen flickered awake. A folder labeled Board Only sat locked behind a login prompt. She didn't try it yet. As she gathered her coat, Ronald stood by the doorway, avoiding her gaze. "You're thorough," he murmured. "It's a habit," she replied. He glanced toward the main hall, then leaned in slightly, voice low. "You're not the first to ask questions. Just be careful." The HOA newsletter arrived in every mailbox, now featuring a full-page color chart, cedar brown, nowhere in sight. Walter stood by the kitchen window, the folded newsletter in one hand, his coffee growing cold in the other. The chart was printed in bright tones: maple mist, garden taupe, evening birch, names that sounded more like candles than paint. His thumb ran over the place where cedar brown should have been. It was gone erased like a bad memory. He set the paper down and adjusted his reading glasses. Across the top of the page in bold serif font, it read, "Reminder, non-compliant. Paint colors will incur daily fines. Enforcement begins immediately." From the living room, Emily glanced up from her laptop. "They're doubling down," she said. Walter nodded. "I just got another notice. $50 a day since Friday." He paused, doing the math quietly. "That's nearly 500. Emily exhaled through her nose and stood grabbing her coat. "Come on, let's talk to some neighbors." Outside, the wind carried dry leaves in slow spirals down Maple Street. At Debbie's Cafe, the bell over the door chimed softly as they entered. A few locals were seated by the window sipping coffee and watching a group of teens rake yards for extra cash. The smell of cinnamon rolls lingered in the air. Debbie slid a mug across the counter toward Emily. "You look like someone who just got a bill." "Make that 2, Emily said, nodding toward Walter. Debbie sighed. They fined me again last month for the same sandwich board I've had for 10 years. Said it disrupts visual harmony. My mom used to say people in this town used to share pie knot fines. Emily smiled faintly. We're tracking that now. I've made a Google Doc. You want in Debbie's eyes lit up? Oh, you bet I do. They sat at a corner booth and Emily opened her laptop. We're listing every odd fine, every change in the bylaws. We've already spotted a few inconsistencies. Walter stirred his coffee, his gaze far away. Back in '91, we signed off on a set of bylaws that had actual limits. They needed a vote for any change. Debbie leaned in. That still apply, Emily was about to answer when her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. One attachment. No text. She tapped it open, a PDF file. Her breath caught as she recognized the format of the HOA financial reports. There, itemized and highlighted in pale yellow, were several line items. $38,700 landscape consultation and legal review. Recipient WM Holdings, LLC. Transfer location, Denver, CO, Colorado. She scrolled down. There were no signatures, no itemized invoices, just lump sums and vague descriptors. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she cross-referenced the business registration. Debbie, she said slowly, this company doesn't even have a Missouri office. It's registered in Colorado under a holding account. Debbie raised an eyebrow. And what kind of HOA in Missouri needs legal landscaping advice from 1,000 miles away? Walter tapped the table twice. Follow the money, Emily. That's what they told us in the Army. Back at the house, they gathered around the kitchen table. Walter brought out a thick binder from the hallway closet. It was dusty and frayed at the corners. He set it down with a thud and opened it to a yellowing sheet. Emily scanned the typewritten lines, her heart quickening. There's a clause here, she said, pointing. If the board is suspected of financial misconduct, any 3 homeowners may submit a formal complaint to initiate a freeze of the operating account pending audit. She looked up. This is it. This could stop the flow, at least temporarily. Walter squinted, adjusting his glasses. That bylaw. I remember signing that one. It's still valid. Janice stormed into the cafe like a winter gust, heels clicking and fake smile frozen in place. Every head turned as the bell over the door gave a nervous jingle. She marched past the bakery counter, her scarf tight around her neck like it might strangle the rage she was barely holding back. Debbie glanced up from the espresso machine, her hand pausing just long enough to nod politely. Emily didn't flinch. She remained seated at the booth near the back, a manila folder on the table beside her cup of tea. Across from her sat Walter, flipping through a copy of the HOA bylaws from 1991, pages creased and speckled with age. Janice stopped at their table. I'd like a word, preferably in private. Emily looked up, calm and composed. Whatever you have to say. Janice, you can say it here, unless it's a legal matter. In that case, we can discuss it with the county judge. Janice's nostrils flared, but she kept her voice low. This circus you've created is hurting this community. Debbie's stirring up division. Walter's? Well, he's just being used. Walter folded his arms. No one's using me. I can still read fine print better than you think. Debbie wiped her hands on a towel and came around the counter. Funny, last month you called my cafe decor unapproved signage. Now you're here yelling under my roof. Emily calmly reached into her folder and slid a sheet of paper across the table. You might want to read what your office still abides by. Section 9.1 of the founding bylaws. 3 homeowners with documented concern can request a temporary account freeze if misconduct is suspected. Janice scanned it, lips pressed thin. You think a judge is going to take that seriously? He already has, Emily said. Earlier that morning, Emily and Walter had stood before a worn wooden desk at the Jackson County Courthouse. The judge, a tall woman in a gray cardigan, sipped chamomile tea as she reviewed the packet. Emily submitted photos of financial inconsistencies, and the strange invoice trailed to Colorado, and Ronald's signed affidavit. Ronald's name had been a surprise ally. He hadn't shown up in person, but he'd signed a declaration as a concerned citizen and board treasurer supporting the need for clarity. After 10 minutes of silent reading, the judge looked up. It meets the criteria. The account is hereby temporarily frozen for 30 calendar days pending review. Walter handed Emily a pen, his old military Parker, the same one he'd used decades ago to sign the original HOA charter. Who's this? It brought down a few tyrants in its time. Back in Willow Creek, the fallout had begun. Janice's voice wavered now, louder than she realized. This kind of upheaval undermines trust. Debbie crossed her arms. No, Janice. Stealing undermines trust. Emily's just giving us a flashlight. Janice turned sharply on her heel, her boots clicking with forced authority. You're making a mistake, maybe Emily said, but it's a legal one. That afternoon, the HOA Clubhouse Bulletin Board bore a fresh notice, this one typed in crisp Times New Roman and laminated for durability. Attention residents. As of November 10, 2023, the Willow Creek HOA operating account is temporarily frozen by order of the Jackson County Court. Regular operations will resume pending financial review. HOA, legal representative people, stopped to read. Mr. Nelson adjusted his cap, whistling low. Mrs. Cruz clucked her tongue and walked away, shaking her head. Words spread like the wind sweeping dry leaves along the sidewalks. Walter stood beside the mailbox, cluster arms folded behind his back. A pair of teenage boys paused near the notice. Guess old Mr. Ellison wasn't just ranting, one whispered. The other nodded. Maybe the old man knew what he was doing. The folding chairs were lined up, the fluorescent lights hummed, and for the first time in years the community center was full. Walter straightened his collar in the front row while Debbie adjusted her phone on a mini tripod. The Facebook Live countdown ticked down from 5 seconds, and the red circle blinked to life. A gentle murmur filled the room, the kind usually heard before a wedding or a town auction. On one long table along the side wall, several residents had brought covered dishes, apple pie, coffee cake, and a slow cooker full of spiced cider. It smelled like late autumn in Missouri. Janice stood near the podium, her posture impeccable, her pearl necklace catching the overhead lights. "Thank you for coming to this special session," she began. Her voice practiced and clipped. "We'll begin with a brief update on community landscaping compliance." A hand shot up in the third row. Madam Chair Emily said, "I request the floor." Janice blinked, then forced a tight smile. We typically save comments for Mr. Rollins from the back, stood and cleared his throat. "Let the girl speak." Others nodded, some clapping softly. Janice hesitated, then gave a curt nod. "Fine. 5 minutes." Emily walked slowly to the front, laptop in hand. She connected the HDMI cord without help, and her presentation flickered onto the large portable screen set up behind the podium. The first slide was simple, a $, a date, and a transaction line reading $38,700. WM Holdings, LLC, Denver, CO. The room quieted. "I'd like to talk about this number," Emily said gently, "and what it means for all of us." She clicked to the next slide, scanned receipts, payment requests, and a screenshot of the Colorado Business Registry showing WM Holdings linked to one Charles Tolliver, Janice's former spouse. Walter watched the room, eyes scanning each shocked face. Emily continued, her voice steady. This company provided no actual services. There was no landscaping. There was no legal review. Just money. Moved out of Willow Creek. Janice opened her mouth, but Emily raised a hand. "Let me finish." She brought up the 1991 HOA bylaws digitized from Walter's original. She highlighted Section 9.1. "This clause," she said, "is why the court ordered a temporary freeze. It protects residents from unchecked spending." A hush, then a voice from the left. "You mean they've been charging us for fake work?" It was Mrs. Cruz clutching her husband's hand. Debbie whispered to the phone, "Keep it steady," as the viewer count climbed. Ronald stood slowly from the second row. "I stayed quiet too long," he said. "I saw discrepancies, but I hoped it was just bad bookkeeping." Janice stepped forward, her smile brittle. "This is a coordinated attack. Lies and assumptions. We followed procedure. Whose procedure someone called. Janice reached for the microphone, her hands shaking. This is slander. No, Emily replied softly. This is transparency. Someone clapped, then more. A slow wave of applause rolled across the room as Janice's face turned red. I will not stand for this mockery, she snapped, slamming the mic back into its stand. It fell sideways with a sharp clang. She spun on her heel and marched down the aisle, bumping into a folding chair as she went. You just proved their point, Mr. Nelson muttered. The door banged shut behind her. A few residents exchanged stunned looks. Someone poured cider. Debbie looked up from her phone. 76 viewers. 81 now. And climbing. Emily returned to her seat. Walter leaned over and placed a firm hand on her shoulder, his palm warm, steady. That's how your grandma used to fight. Quiet, but firm. By sunrise, the clubhouse door bore a new notice, emergency board vote, tonight at 6 p.m. Walter spotted it during his morning walk, the same time he always passed the sycamore near the mailbox cluster. The paper was freshly taped, its bold black lettering trembling slightly in the morning breeze. He adjusted his cap and read it twice, then turned toward Debbie's cafe. Inside, the usual quiet buzz of conversation was replaced by soft murmurs of speculation. I heard they want to suspend all fines until this is sorted, Mrs. Cruz whispered. Nah, she's just trying to buy time, Mr. Nelson replied, sipping his coffee with a grimace. Too little, too late. Emily sat by the front window, her laptop, open notes, stacked beside her. Ronald had already called at dawn. She wants a closed-door session, he said, his voice tight. Just board members. That's not happening, Emily replied, fingers typing as she spoke. Section 7.3 of the bylaws. Any special vote requires community attendance if initiated by residents. Ronald exhaled. You're right. I'll back it. By mid-morning, Walter had gathered a list of signatures nearly every household except 2. Debbie posted a photo on Facebook emergency vote. We'll be there. Will you beneath it likes and comments stacked up like autumn leaves. At 5:45 p.m., the clubhouse parking lot overflowed. Some walked from down the street bundled in coats holding folding chairs just in case. The sun dipped behind the oaks, casting long shadows over the sidewalk. Janice stood near the podium again, but her expression had changed, less composed, more brittle. This is a misunderstanding, she began, voice louder than needed. We contracted services through an external firm. The accounting was handled by them, not internally. Emily, seated with Walter and Debbie near the front, didn't interrupt. Not yet. I understand concerns have been raised, Janice continued, but these claims have not been reviewed in any official capacity. Ronald rose from his seat in the second row. That's why we're here, Janice, to make it official. Emily stood as well and walked toward the podium with a folder in hand. I'd like to enter this into the record, she said, handing out printed documents. This is the business registration form for WM Holdings, LLC. It lists Charles Tolliver as the registered agent. According to marriage records and local filings, that's your former husband. Janice's jaw tightened. That has nothing to do with, Emily continued calmly. These payments were signed off under your authorization. They were never disclosed to the board, never reviewed by residents. The room remained still. Even the fluorescent lights seemed quieter than usual. Mr. Rollins called out, Is this vote still happening? Walter nodded. We have the signatures. Let's proceed. Ronald stepped forward now, standing behind the podium. As acting facilitator, I call for a public vote of no confidence regarding HOA President Janice Tolliver. One by one, hands raised. Yay. Yay, yay. Walter raised his hand with a steady movement. Any opposed? Ronald asked. 5 hands, hesitant mostly from the older inner circle, rose. Motion carries, Ronald said. 48-5. Effective immediately. Janice Tolliver is removed from office. A few gasps, some applause, no shouting. Janice didn't say a word. She gathered her purse and binder, stood, and walked down the center aisle as if leaving a funeral. The door shut softly behind her. Nobody followed. Debbie turned off her phone camera. 312 views, she whispered to Emily. Captions already up. HOA, clean house change. Starts with one porch. Walter sipped from his thermos as Emily sat back down. He chuckled, the kind that came from deep memory, not just humor. Told you Cedar Brown never goes out of style. The wind was cold, but the smell of sweet potato casserole and cinnamon filled the air. Emily had spent the morning sweeping out Walter's garage, stringing up warm white lights along the ceiling beams and taping flannel blankets over the side windows to block the draft. By sunset, the space was full of voices and laughter mixing with the scent of roasted turkey pumpkin pie and someone's overly ambitious cranberry jalapeno dip. Neighbors came carrying foil-wrapped dishes and folding chairs, shaking snow off boots and trading smiles. Rita brought a pot of her famous chili extra mild for Walter. Mr. Nelson showed up with 2 loaves of cornbread and an apologetic grin. Even the Rollinses, who rarely attended anything that didn't involve golf, came bearing an apple tart and a 6-pack of root beer. Emily stood near the workbench where she'd propped up the wooden sign Ellison House. Since 1978. The edges had been repainted carefully by hand. Debbie caught sight of it and nudged her gently. "They told you to take that down." Emily nodded. "And today I put it back up." Ronald arrived carrying a manila folder tucked neatly under one arm. He shook hands, exchanged pleasantries, and made his way to Walter, who was stirring a cup of instant cider at the back of the garage. "Mr. Ellison," Ronald said with a soft formality. County reviewed the complaint. "And, these are yours." He handed over a few papers. On top, notice of dismissal. Violation voided. Walter looked at them, then at Emily, then back at the papers. "Took them long enough?" Ronald chuckled. "You earned it." Debbie clinked her glass lightly. "Everyone, can I have your ears for just a moment?" The room quieted. "We don't have a mic tonight, so you'll have to deal with my teacher voice," she said. "I just want to thank Walter for hosting us again, and to Emily, who reminded us what it means to stand up for each other." A round of warm applause filled the garage, followed by a few heartfelt cheers and someone yelling, "She's got my vote for mayor." Emily laughed. "Let's start smaller. Debbie asked me to stay on as a legal advisor." "Unpaid," she teased. "But I've accepted. I've also decided not to return to my old job. I'm staying in Willow Creek. For good." A few people clapped again. Rita teared up. Walter raised his cider and simply said, "To family, old and new." Later in the evening, as pies were cut and stories shared, Emily set up a folding table with a small cardboard sign, Senior Legal Night, monthly Q&A. She already had 3 names on the sign-up sheet. Kids fell asleep on jackets in the corner. Someone played a Johnny Mathis Christmas record on an old player. Outside, snowflakes had started to drift across the driveway, catching the light like powdered sugar. Walter stepped outside just after 9, hands deep in his pockets. He stared at the porch, bathed in moonlight, its railings solid, its boards straight. Emily joined him after a few moments, standing beside him without a word. He reached out his fingers, brushing the armrest like he had so many mornings before. Still Cedar Brown. And still standing. The garage still held the scent of cinnamon and old wood, but something deeper had settled in trust, reborn quiet and steady. What began as a silent fine over a porch became a chorus of neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder. When rules are used for good, communities thrive. When they're misused, they crumble. Perhaps it's never too late to join hands with neighbors to speak up gently and to remind those in charge that every porch tells a story, especially the ones painted Cedar Brown.